Welcome to the Sports Governance Podcast, the place where we dig into the systems, decisions, and power structures that shape sports all around the world. My name is Younes Fideli, and for this first episode, we're starting with the basics. What exactly is sports governance? Who are its main actors? What are its core principles, and why does it even matter? You hear and read the term sports governance constantly, after a scandal breaks, before a World Cup bid, when doping cases emerge, or when people call for reform. But behind that term is an entire framework that influences athlete protection, club management, and even international diplomacy. Let's break it down. What is exactly sports governance? There isn't just one definition of sports governance. Different scholars emphasize different aspects, but the core idea remains more or less the same. According to the European Commission, sports governance is the framework through which a sports body sets policy, manages risk, and reports to its members. If we look at the research by Henry and Lee, it highlights something very crucial, that sports governance is ultimately about how power is exercised within sports organizations and systems. On the other hand, Arnaud Garret stresses the importance of transparency, accountability, and integrity, while Wolfgang Menig shows how weak governance structures enable corruption and unethical behavior. Taken together, all these perspectives show that governance is not about daily operations. It's the architecture, the system of power, oversight, and values that shape the entire sporting ecosystem. And governance extends to everything that happens off the pitch, but influences what happens on it. Athletes, agents, and coaches, all of them follow rules and disciplinary frameworks created by governance structures. Clubs, national authorities, and sports governing bodies are expected to enforce these structures and protect the integrity of sports. Obviously, these institutions are expected to follow themselves the rules they impose on others, something that historically has not always been the case, unfortunately. Sports governance is not centralized. It is a multi-layered system involving many actors, all with different forms of authority. In an interesting scoping review, Dolly, Lopke, and Smith explained that governance operates across three levels: organizational, systemic, and political. Each brings its own stakeholders. At the organizational level, you have sports governing bodies, international and national federations, also clubs. They set rules, establish strategic direction, enforce codes of conduct, and manage internal integrity mechanisms. Garrett's work makes it clear. Without transparency and ethical leadership, these organizations become vulnerable. Then at the systemic level, you find institutions like FIFA, WADA, the IOC, and regional bodies such as the UEFA or the EU. Additionally, Menig points out that these actors influence global norms, from anti-corruption standards to bidding procedures for mega events. At the political level, states and governments are major players. As shown by Chu Chen, governments use sports strategically, through funding policies, soft power initiatives, and regulation. This political influence can push organizations toward reform or towards serving national interests. And finally, legal actors have become increasingly influential. The CAS, EU courts, and national legal systems shape governance through rulings on doping, autonomy, competition law, and Lex Sportiva. This bibliometric study by Kamenika Yusova and colleagues highlights just how central this legal influence has become. Together, these actors form an interconnected governance ecosystem, one where no actor operates in isolation. Across the literature, four principles come up repeatedly when discussing good governance. First principle is autonomy. It is sports' ability to regulate itself. as a long-standing principle protected by organizations like the IOC and embedded in the Olympic Charter. But, as Manning argues, autonomy can also create opacity, weak oversight, and opportunities for abuse if it is not balanced by external control. Second principle, transparency. It means access to information, clear financial reporting, open decision-making, and independent monitoring. Gerhardt and the European Commission stress transparency as a foundational tool against corruption. Third, accountability. It is about who answers for decisions and how policies are enforced. Scholars show that accountability gaps are common, and they allow unethical behavior to persist. And last but not least, integrity. It goes far beyond anti-doping. It includes ethical leadership, conflict of interest rules, codes of conduct, and responsible behavior at every level of sport. Kosa and colleagues highlight how integrity indicators are essential to any governance evaluation. When even one of these pillars collapses, the whole system becomes fragile. But why does it matter now? If you look at recent events, the importance of governance becomes obvious. FIFA's 2015 corruption crisis exposed the ways opaque decision-making and weak oversight enables bribery and influence trading. Menig describes FIFA, for instance, as a textbook example of what happens when transparency and accountability fail. Doping scandals, especially cases like the Russian state-sponsored program, for instance, have shown that governance breakdowns can occur at national and international levels. Scholars highlight just how systemic these failures can be. Mega events, from the Olympics to the World Cup, raise questions about financial transparency, bidding integrity, and ethical obligations. As Menig documents, corruption has plagued bidding processes in Salt Lake City, Germany, Brazil, Russia, etc. Meanwhile, states like Qatar and Saudi Arabia use sports as a soft power tool. Chu Chu Chen's work shows how governance intersects with geopolitics, state legitimacy, and diplomatic influence. And finally, legal frameworks, from EU laws to CAS rulings, increasingly define what sports autonomy can or cannot include. These issues are not isolated. They show that governance determines whether sport remains credible, fair, and socially legitimate. Now, I want to step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture. Because, as we outlined, governance is not only about sport itself. It shapes how sport connects with other sectors like politics, economy, and society as a whole. And when you zoom out, you realize just how many layers are involved. Whether people admit it or not, sports and politics constantly overlap because, yes, sport is political. You see it when federations have to decide who can compete under what flag, how they respond to political pressure during international tensions, or how they handle situations where governments try to influence decisions. These moments don't come with a manual, and that's exactly where governance matters. Clear governance structures help organizations stay consistent when dealing with political sensitivity, instead of reacting emotionally or improvising from crisis to crisis. It also matters internally. Who gets a vote? How are leaders elected? Whose interests are represented? These are political questions inside the world of sport itself, and governance is what is supposed to keep them fair, as outlined in a paper published in 2014. Sport today is a huge economic system, and governance plays a quiet but essential role in keeping it functioning. Athletes depend on governance for stable contracts, safe working conditions, fair mobility and protection if things go wrong. Clubs and leagues rely on it to manage ownership, long-term investment and partnership. And then there is a whole world of new economic activity, Sports analytics, biometric data, digital performance tools. As Manek and Gray outline it, these things didn't exist 20 years ago. Suddenly, sports organizations are dealing with data privacy, consent, and technology governance that was not even imagined when many rules were written. Even grassroots sports is part of this. Local clubs survive thanks to funding rules, facility access policies, and reporting requirements. Good governance can make the difference between a thriving community club and one that slowly disappears. Sport is also a social institution. It influences how people see themselves, how communities come together, and how values are transmitted. Governance is at the center of that. For Hans-Erik Ness, it sets the tone for how safe athletes feel speaking up, how complaints are handled, how inclusive a club or federation actually is, and how seriously issues like discrimination or harassment are taken. Today, the public expects sports organizations to show that they take these things seriously, not just through statements, but through real structures that protect people. And athletes themselves are starting to have a stronger voice. They are pushing for better mental health supports, more predictable schedules, and a real say in decisions that affect them. Governance has to evolve to answer these expectations. Good governance creates a sporting environment where participation is accessible, leadership is responsible, and values like fairness and equality are not just slogans. They are built into the way organizations operate. Why does this bigger picture matters? When you look at all these intersections between political side, economic, and social, it becomes clear that governance is not a side topic. It is the backbone that determines how sports interacts with the world around it. And as sports grows more global, more commercial, and more influential, the need for solid governance only becomes more important. To conclude, sports governance is not a niche concern. It is the foundation of how sport operates, shaping policy, athlete rights, financial integrity, and international influence. Understanding governance means understanding the game behind the game. If you enjoyed this introduction and want to help shape the next episodes, let me know in the comments what topics you would like explored. If you found this useful, make sure to follow the podcast on streaming platforms and LinkedIn. You are listening to the Sports Governance Podcast by Younes Ferrari. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time.